Hey, welcome everybody to the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. Hey, today's episode solo cast, you, me, just talking about something that I think is very important, and that is your identity. Uh, I took a few months off, and the one thing that I found out was identity is something that we create. It's not something that just happens to us, and you've got to be intentional in life. And I tell you what, I've had this epiphany, and I've had this thing that just came across me that I'm just super excited about. And even people that talk to me just say, "Stan, I haven't seen you bring all of the great things you do together into one platform and be so excited." And so today I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it holistically. And if you're somebody that feels like, hey, you know what? I thought I had an identity, and that identity is starting to wane because I thought it was my career, but there's something bigger in life, then you want to listen to today's episode. You really do. Anyway, let's have some fun. Uh, you know, get a virtual cup of coffee, pull up, and let's listen to this episode of the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. Hey, I'm Stan Gibson, and this is the Inspiration Podcast. Let's get to it. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. Today we've got a solo cast. Yeah, just me and you talking a little bit about leadership, talking about intentionality, talking about how you get your life back together, how you create an identity that becomes a legacy. I've told you in episode 21, I was talking a little bit about the fact that, earlier this year, I took a couple of months. I was thinking about, going in business with a couple of other guys. And the more I got into it, the more I realized, I really like what I do as an entrepreneur. I really like running a business on my own. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what? I think one of the things that came upon me during this time of, it wasn't really a sabbatical because I was testing something out, but it's just like, God kind of laid something on me. And that was this whole idea of intentionality. And I was reading actually a couple of books. One was by Craig Groeschel. If you don't know who Craig Groeschel is, I just think if you want to listen to another podcast in addition to the Inspiration Podcast with Stan on leadership, listen to Craig Groeschel. He's a preacher in the Kansas City area, but more importantly, he's also just a great communicator of leadership and does a phenomenal job. And he wrote a book, and he wrote it with Dr. Wayne Chappell. It just came out. Dr. Wayne Chappell is this psychological coach. He's the closest I've found to the principles that I teach. And he's an NBA, National Basketball Association, but he's an NBA psychologist. He works with the Marines. He works with holistic coaching. And I think it's called whole coaching, but it really talks not just about how you get ahead as a business person, but also on the personal side. And it goes into all the neuroscience and all the things that I just truly love. And so I started reading that. And, I read another book by John Mitchell, who is a coach for the 13 head coaches at the University of Texas, plus all 385 student athletes. And now he's moved his practice into the School of Business there at UT. And the thing I liked about it is it matches up with what Dr. Wayne Chappell is doing. And it's because there's a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of creating your identity. It isn't just a name it and claim it. It's once you know how you want to show up, then in those areas, you've got work to be done. You list out what you're going to do for the next 90 days, and then you record it. And sometimes you're speaking it because there's a neuroscience in speaking in the morning that resonates most with your brain. And then there's the idea of listening to certain identity comments or statements before you go to bed. And it's that nighttime and that morning when your brain is in, more of a rested state that it starts to absorb and it starts to take on, new intentionality. So hang with me here for just a little bit. And I want to talk to you a little bit because, of the clients that I'm seeing, and when I had this just revelation, I started reaching out, and a lot of clients just started pouring in, started saying this very thing. I've lost my identity. If someone has moved the cheese on me later in life, and that goalpost is moved, And so there's a frustration level. And so, typically this person, they've done everything right. They've done decades of climbing. They have achieved, they've delivered, their title's impressive. It's real. Compensations, real. The respect in the room is real. Everything is happening for a reason. And yet, something's really profoundly wrong and they can't put their finger on it and they can't fully explain it to their spouse, to their board, or even to themselves. And when I say to the spouse, I talk to my wife a lot about, what's going on, and she's great. She's got, a great ear and she loves to listen. But, there's sometimes when they aren't in that context of what you do in your career, that they've got a supportive ear, but they can't really relate in some ways. And when a lot of executives go to their board, they can't go to their board with their problems because it's a sign of weakness. They can't go to their direct reports. It's a sign of weakness. So they're sitting here in this area of confusion of their identity is starting to dissipate and they really don't know how to act and react. And so you see what they're really experiencing, it's an identity crisis that's really disguised as a career question. You see, they built a life around a lot of external metrics that felt like this is my purpose. This is what I do. And those metrics no longer fill the room. They're just not happy. I mean, the goalpost didn't just move, it disappeared. And when you've organized your entire nervous system around hitting a target, the absence of that target, it just feels like a free fall. When you don't feel that purpose and showing up is merely just showing up, it feels like a free fall and you don't know how to address it. And so, the cost is showing up everywhere. It's not showing up at work. I mean, the P&L is still there, the profit and loss. I mean, things are still getting along, but there's real damage taking place inside. You see their marriage is running on logistics and history rather than presence and intentionality. Their kids, assuming they're still at home, they sense an absence that has nothing to do with geography, but mom and dad, either mom's checked out or dad's checked out, but it's just disappeared. And when you organized your entire nervous system around hitting a target, the absence of that target, again, it just feels like a free fall. And they've also neglected their health uh, in the name of productivity. Well, I'm busy. And when you've done that, you become white knuckled through sheer discipline. You're not peaceful. In fact, there's something when I speak a lot, I use a quote, and it's a quote that was actually given to me by a client at one point in time. This has been like 8 or 9, 10 years ago, and I loved it because it was from the Dalai Lama. And I'll read this, and I always read it very slow. I say that, the Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about man, is man himself. He said, you see, they sacrifice their health in order to make more money. Then they sacrifice their money in order to recuperate their health. So, they're anxious about the future. They don't enjoy life. They don't live in the present or the future, and they live as if they're never going to die. And they die having never really lived. See, I think that's so ironic. I think, the older I get, the more I realize I, too, sacrificed probably my health early on in order to just get more money. There was this fear factor of when is enough enough? And then you get to a point in life where you say, oh my goodness, I hope I've saved enough. I hope I've done well because now it's that very money that I need to use to recuperate my health in my life because I don't want to live as though it was meaningless. So those are the types of clients. That's a specific type of client that I'm seeing. And, here's what they desperately need. And they can't get it from a leadership coach. They don't get it from a therapist, a retreat weekend, although I offer those things. But they need someone who's lived it, who's lived where they are and can help them build a life that is entirely theirs and unapologetically is theirs. And, the older I get, the more experience have had as an entrepreneur, that I've had as an executive. That's really kind of what I started to realize over this little sabbatical. That's what I bring to the table. See, I'm not bringing advice to the table. I'm bringing translation because I've lived in those shoes. I've lived in those boots of almost everybody that has come to me. I've been in those boots, not just professionally, but personally, marriage, raising children, now as a grandparent, but also someone who's a friend, someone who has had a career, had multiple careers, and has been very intentional about it. So, 40 years of executive experience means that I speak their language fluently. I speak their language fluently. And it's a language of performance, accountability, results, sacrifice. And Lord, I can talk to you about sacrifice. And I'm no different than you, but we've all made these sacrifices. And I don't have to explain what it costs at that level. I already know. And it's that permission structure that makes everything else possible. It's when we start to have those conversations that we start to have some real breakthroughs, some real meaning. So when someone sits across from me and we start to go through extreme self-awareness, I'm talking about Clifton Strength Finders, I'm talking about the Enneagram, I'm talking about another psychometric assessment called Aptive, something that is a derivative of Clifton Strength Finders, which is called the Genius Spark. When we start to work on this, light bulbs start to go off because I integrate these psychometric assessments into a single assessment. And so when they sit and they look into this integrated, single, coherent story about who they actually are, something starts to shift. Not because the data is new, but because for the first time, it's like someone's holding up in a mirror, something that reflects them as a human being rather than a performance machine. I mean, they get to see who they really are. And we start to collect a lot of who we are at 4 years old, between 4 and 7 years old. That's when a lot of people start telling us what we are, what we're not. They start shaping our mind and we just hold it there. We hold it there in the limbic system and the part of the brain, the amygdala, and all the parts that just hold it there and keep polishing lies and false beliefs. And that's what we start to talk about when we really get into that area of talking about self-awareness. That's when the magic starts to happen. And we evolve from there because while you can't talk about the future until you know the present, until you know who you are. And I always say, know that you're that Michael Phelps or Katie Ledecky of your swim lane. When we really know where your energy is and who you are, who you're not, how you act and react under pressure, under stress. Once you can then build the antidote around these things. I always say, I'd like to work myself out of a job. I want my clients to be able to self-diagnose and understand themselves so well that they don't need me. After our relationship is over. And that's exactly how it works out. But when we get to that point of having self-awareness, then I have them go into a 5-year journal. And this 5-year journal asks them a question nobody in their professional life has ever asked them. Who do you want to be when you finally bet on yourself? Who do you want to be when you bet on yourself? And that question written in past tense, handed to their nervous system is a done deal. That's who I'm going to become. That's when neurological reprogramming starts to happen. That is the science of my research that makes what I do credible and executable. Because when you start to look at the future and then you start to have to answer questions in a journal, what were the relationships I needed to create? What were the ones I needed to terminate? What were the routines I did in life? What were the breaks that I looked for that came along? The education, the things I must do and had to do. What did that look like? And how did you get there? It's a very long process. It's one that, it takes some time. It takes a lot of, I always say coffee shop time because I always find I get my best ideas when I go to a coffee shop. And I just think that that's a time that we can sit and just think away from work about intentionality. What does life look like? And how did I get there? But the work isn't done. We then go into the final piece of it, which is called the identity transformation worksheet. And this gives them a lever of being able to say, how do I want to show up in the most critical areas of my life? And typically, that's going to be your career. It's going to be your relationships. It's going to be well-being, how well you take care of yourself. It's going to be your purpose or your spirituality, and it's going to be your mindset. Who do you hang around with most? I'll guarantee you it's you. You're with you 24/7. So when I say your mindset, you have to have intentionality around around your mindset. It's just really, really important. Um, Once we have looked at and you have been able to state your identity, I'm the type of person who, and your brain's pretty smart. It knows when you're calling BS. It knows if I said I'm the smartest person in the world, it'd say, remember that thing you did the other day? Not so fast, Dan. No, your brain's pretty smart. And so you have to write these identity statements in a very subtle way of a way that encourages you to believe it, a way of, I'm the type of person who is transforming into, I am becoming, things like that, to where you actually have evidence, psychological evidence of how you're changing. And then you start to believe it. And once we create all of that, then we go into the second stage. And the second stage is really important because now we're going to build 90-day I must statements. Here's what I must do. And I typically have my clients create 2 to 3 I must, needle moving type things that they need to do in the next 90 days to support this new identity. Whether it be your career, again, whether it be your relationships, whether it be your well-being, how you're going to take care of your body, your mind, your soul, your spirituality, your mindset. When I talk about, intentionality around relationships, one of the key relationships in your life is your spouse, assuming that, you're married. And, just things like, what intentionality do you have? I mean, I've been married 44 years. And so you'd think, well, you know what? There comes a point in time where you just kind of coast, and you can never coast in a relationship. And, one of the things, for example, Dr. Gary Chapman back in 1992 wrote a book about the 5 love languages. And, I would challenge you. Do you know what your spouse's love language is? I mean, one is words of affirmation. Another one's quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, just, making coffee or doing things for your spouse. The final one is physical touch. Knowing which one, my wife and I have talked about it. And I think it's really, that quality time that we spend together. That's where our energy levels just go up. And that's hers and that's mine. And so, I'm intentional about it. My 90-day plan is intentional around non-negotiable coffee time with my wife, device down, listening. What are we going to talk about? How am I going to listen? And it's amazing. Intentionality is absolutely amazing. And so, it's one of the things that we do is we create our identity in these 5 areas. We create our 90-day plan. And then I also have clients either find quotes that they really like that support their identity or scripture. And then the most important thing is we record it. We record it on our phone. And what I find from the science and the neuroscience is listening to my identity. And it isn't just listening, because you have to even use you have to feel like if you say, I am ageless, or that's one of mine, because I just like to feel like, I really don't even think about age. Or I think about others of, I am one who listens with empathy. It isn't just saying it, faking it till you make it. And again, I have to create some action steps in order to to, fill it out, but I also have to feel it inside. As I hear that statement and I've set it into my recorder and I'm listening back, I have to feel, what does a person who listens with empathy, what do what does that feel like? What does that look like? And so you have to have this intimacy, and this is all neuroscience, everybody. So I'm not making this up. This is hard and fast and true. And you can ask anybody, who's a psychologist whether this stuff's real or not. And it's very real. But you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to listen to it as you go to bed, because the whole day we're in what's called the beta state, where there are sound waves and frequencies when we're at work that don't allow our minds to slow down, to actually absorb what it is we're trying to put in there. It isn't until we get into what's called the alpha state, and later on when you do start to fall asleep, there's delta and there's theta. But when you start to go into theta, delta, you're totally asleep. But as you start to wind down in that alpha state is when your mind will actually start to absorb a lot of the things that you're the identity that you're creating. And when you wake up in the morning, then there's a neuroscience around speaking it. Speaking your 90-day plan before, within the first 30 minutes of waking up. I try to do it as soon as possible. But when you start to speak it in your own voice, you hear it in your own voice, what I'm doing for the next 90 days. And I have a cutoff at every quarter. Then I got to go find a coffee shop and recreate another 90 days of needle moving type task that will support my identity. But when you hear it in your voice and you transfer it to your calendar and you have a plan and intentionality around what you're doing for the next 90 days, I will tell you, you will 2 and 3x. If you're a salesperson, you will 2 and 3x your production. As a spouse, it's hard to measure, but you will 2 and 3x your relationship with your spouse when there is that kind of intentionality. When we're talking about spirituality or with relationship, when we're talking about spirituality, having that kind of intentionality, you will grow deeper and deeper in your faith. You have to do this. This is the outcome. It isn't so much the process, it's what's the outcome. And the outcome is stronger relationships all around. Better career with purpose, greater mindset, greater well-being. You start to feel better. You start to have more energy. And that's what I'm finding out with executives and clients right now. That's what they want. It's disguised as a career question, but it's really a life question. How do I have more energy? How do I operate with intentionality? And eventually, how do I leave a legacy? So that's what this time away in the first part of the year has really taught me most. It's taught me that there's only a few people in the US that are doing what I'm doing. And I almost just needed that affirmation, that validation that what I'm doing, while I was doing it in segments with clients, when I brought it into a platform, it all made sense. And so now, whether I'm group coaching with an executive and their direct reports, whether it's the Leadership Lab, which is a mastermind that I host, we're talking about intentionality. We're group coaching. We're leveraging off of each other. So we'll talk about it another time. I mean, that's one of the clients that I have. The other one are the ones that everything's clicking. They just want to leave a legacy. And we'll talk about that in an episode coming up. And I think you'll enjoy that as well. So if you're finding yourself saying, you know what, boy, there's a lot that just resonated right there. I just feel like I've lost that mojo. I feel like my identity, my whole life was built around my career and the success. And I got there and it's like, now what? It just evaporated. It just evaporated. So anyway, if that sounds like you, stick around. Listen to a few more episodes of the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. We'll continue to talk about how we create the best version of you. And don't let life pass by. Don't sacrifice your health in order to make more money so that you have to use that money to recuperate your health. Don't live as if you're never going to die and die, never having really lived. Thanks for listening today. As I always say, may you all live a rich and intentional life. Thanks, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. So how'd you feel about today's episode? Where are you in life? Are you that one that's sacrificing your health in order to get more money, or using that money to get your health back? Regardless, I really enjoy just this process. My wife always asks me, "Why do you do the podcast?" And she doesn't mean it in a bad way. She just wants to know why. And it's because it's my chance to connect with you. It's my chance to connect with you in a way that a lot of my clients show up, but I know you're out there too. You're out there wondering about your identity, wondering, do I really know what my purpose is? Do I really have intentionality around, not just my career, but even just my mindset? Do I have it around with, my spirituality, with my well-being? And again, it isn't so much the process, it's the outcomes. Could I 2X all that stuff? What would life look like if I had a better relationship with not just my spouse, my kids, my friends, my colleagues? What would it look like if I were intentional? What would it look like if I achieved where my mind knows that I want to be 4 and 5 years out, and I journaled what that looks like? What would happen if I didn't? That's the bigger question. What would happen if you didn't? Stretch yourself, challenge yourself, change your identity to the one that is best for you. You don't want to have any regrets in life, my friends. You don't. And so taking that time to have self-awareness, to thoroughly journal out some of the more important questions in your life, and then building an identity with actionable items, that's where you want to be. That's where you're going to start to 2 and 3X everything in your life, and that's when life starts to make sense. So give me a call. Let's talk. Again, I've got a retreat coming up this fall up in the Appalachian Mountains that is going to involve part of this. I've got the Leadership Lab, which involves a lot of really well-intentioned executives that are looking for their purpose. And there's nothing better than co-elevating with one another. And I do group coaching in organizations for most leaders and their team. If you feel this is something, this intentionality and this specificity is something that you want in your life and you want in the people around you, let's talk. Let's talk. Just go to leadwithstan.com, leadwithstan.com, and let's have a conversation. And I will guarantee you, everybody will start to live a rich and intentional life. Thanks a lot. Take care. Hang in there with me. We're going to have a great episode coming up, one that I know you're going to enjoy. And may you all live a rich and intentional life. Have a great day. Bye. Well, that's it for today, my friends. I hope this conversation sparked something meaningful for you. If it did, share it with someone who could use a little inspiration too. You can find more tools, stories, and coaching to support your journey at stangibsonspeaks.com.